Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Freilich Chanukah. Thank you for joining us. We're continuing in the Ayin. We're in Drushim LaChanukah. We're in the piece that begins Hine Inyan HaChanukah. Chanukah, says the Ayin, who bechinas tikun hatoyu. It's in the concept of fixing the toyu. Toyu was the state of the world before Hashem organized it. It was a state of, in English we call it chaos, but really it's an intermingling of kedusha and physicality where it wasn't organized. And our job is to rectify, to fix the world, to bring it back to the way it was supposed to be when Hashem created the world. Just as a small way of introduction, in order for Hashem to have created a physical universe, Hashem had to remove Kaviyachol, his godliness, because godliness is all spiritual, but at the same time not remove it, right? Only something that Hashem could do. And then he had to send in the Or of Hashem in order to be Mechayah the world. The world, the Kalim that Hashem set up, could not contain the Or of Hashem because it was tremendous, right? Imagine, right, you're right next to a power plant, and instead of having a transformer to dial down the electric current, you feed it straight into your house. Every outlet in your house will explode. Every appliance in your house will explode because the current is too strong. So lahavdil, that was the same idea. That was called Shviras HaKelim. It's a Kabbalistic terminology in where Hashem's Or caused the Kelim in order to shatter. That caused physicality, that caused taivus and materialism, and our job through serving Hashem, through specifically the physical world, to elevate it back to its original source, as we're going to see, and that is what is our avodah in Chanukah, and that was primarily begun through Avrahom Avinu. So as we begin the piece, it says, Hine inyan hachanukah, b'chinas tikun hatoyu, k'maimer hakosiv, v'ha'aretz hoisa soy v'avoyu. Like it says, the world was toyu v'avoyu in the beginning of Bereshis. V'yar melikim, and Hashem said, Yihi Or. There should be Or. The Or will fix the state of toyu. Now, the state of toyu was never completely fixed, even though when we walk in the world, we see everything organized. But it's not organized because we are still chased by our taivas. We're still drawn by the taivas, the physicality of the world, as opposed to the spirituality of the world. Orzeh, says the Basayin, Meram is l'or shel ner Chanukah. It's hinted to the Or of ner Chanukah. Now, this is not just a Kabbalistic idea. The Maral of Prague talks about this as well, that the original Or, it also is a reference to the ner Chanukah. Ner mitzvah v'toyer Or, like it says, the ner mitzvah v'toyer Or. V'af and even though Shabrias Olam Hoisa b'Rosh Hashanah, and even though the creation of the world was on Rosh Hashanah, so what does that have to do with Chanukah? Because Makam Yedua Sheshleimus Habriya Hoisa Achakach Ma'at Ma'at. The world took time in order for it to reach its complete stage. This is a Kabbalistic Hasidus idea that slowly but surely the world needed certain Zmanim in order to reach higher levels. For example, the world needed a Shabbos, it needed a Sukkot, it needed a Chanukah, as we're going to see, it needed a Purim, it needed a Pesach, it needed a Shuas, it needed Yidden learning different Masechtas, doing different mitzvahs. That took a little bit by little bit. L'chol eis ve'eis ki yedua, and every time throughout this Zman of the seasons, of the years, Ushleimus tikkun hatoyu, and the complete fixing, the complete tikkun of the state of toyu, Hoisa b'Chanukah, happened many years later in the time of Chanukah. V'ascholas hanes, in the beginning of the nes of Toyu, which was the beginning of the process of rectifying the world, Hoisa b'Avrahom, started with Avraham. Kemaimer HaMagid, like the great Magid Morenayim, the Bas Ayin was a Talmud of the Morenayim, the Chernobyl dynasty, Chernobyl, Skver, Rachmistrifk, they all come from Chernobyl, the Magid. As opposed to, not to be confused with the Mizritcha Magid, this is the Ma'oreinayim. And he says on the Pasuk, Nelcha at Koi, when Avraham Avinu went with Yitzchak, Eliezer, and Ishmael to the Akedah, he told them, we are going at Koi. And the Ma'oreinayim learns a remez, at Koi, we are going until Chanukah, at Koi until Chafei. Chafei, Klal Yisrael has to pick up the slack. I know ad bechinas Koi shel Chanukah, until the bechina of Koi of Chanukah. And this is alluded to different inyanim, what Avraham Avinu had to do by bowing down, by different inyanim that the Yevanim did when they broke through the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, the different pirtzas, every pirza, every hole that they did in the wall was connected a different midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And our job, which the Chashmonaim did, was to rebuild that wall, to refix it. Right, like it says in the beginning of Bereshis, right? Bihi baram. It's not really Bihi baram Hashem created, Ella bi Avram, through Avram Avinu, which means the world was fixed, was started its fixing process through Avram Avinu. Hashem created the world. There was no Torah yet. So what schus did the world have to exist? Only because Bihi baram, because Avram Avinu. Pirush HaKosov, as explains, Eile tolus Hashemayim va'aretz Bihi baram, Rashi Tevis Toyu. That has the same Rashi Tevis as Toyu. The words told us, Hashemayim va'aretz is Toyu. The Niskan Alidei, how is it fixed? Bihi baram, when he created. This is the concept that Avram Avinu is the same words as Bihi baram. And Avram has the same gematria, amazingly, as Ner. Meram is Lamash Amarnu b'shebechinas Toyu Niskan Alidei Avram Avinu b'ner Chanukkah. That Avram Avinu fixed the world, began the process through the avoida of Ner Chanukah. Now, we have to explain this. Now, we know that Avraham Avinu kept all the mitzvahs, and Mistama, he lit Ner Chanukah, but there was no mitzvah yet of Ner Chanukah, but there was an avoida that the Bas Ayin, there was a service, there's a work that we have to do that's meramis in the Ner Chanukah, which Avraham Avinu started. Shehu, Kiyam Mitzvahs Bris Milah. Avraham Avinu was Mekayim, the mitzvah of Bris Milah, Kiyam ha'olam, which ultimately is the kiyam of the world. The main taivas, the main Yetzirah is through the bris. Avraham Avinu was able to be mesaken, to start that through the bris milah. Like it says, if I did not have the bris, I would not have created the world. And therefore, since Avraham Avinu was mekayim the mitzvah of milah, that began the tikkun of Toyu, like we explained. And that tikkun was continuously being worked on until the night of Chanukah, when it was ultimately finished. Like it says in the Nedarim, right? This is not a Kabbalah type of thing. This is not a Hasidus type of thing. In the Nedarim it says that Gedoyla Milah, it says in Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, great is Milah, that if not for Milah, Chadosh Baruch Hu would not have created the world. So we see that the schus that the world had to exist until we got the Torah was because Bihi baram, because Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu started with Bris Milah. Now the Bas Ayin is going to tie this beautifully into the avoid of Ner Chanukah. Avram Avinu, we know, was sitting by the opening, the entrance of his tent, when he had the Bris Milah, hoping that guests would come in order that he could serve them. We're going to see what was so special of bringing guests into the tent. Why was Avram so fixated in the mitzvah of Achnasas Archim? Yes, besides the fact that Avram was Baal Chesed, but there was a special avoida, as we're going to see, that involves in Achnasas Archim. Pirush la'achar hamila, hischil hatikun shel toyu ayidei pesach oyel. That after Avram Avinu did the Bris Milah, he now elevated himself into a new level, to having new abilities, and he started the tikkun process of toyu through Pesach HaOyel. Now, just to remind ourselves what happened in the world of Toyu, the world shattered. The world couldn't contain the aura of Hashem, and Kedusha and physicality got mixed together, right? And we know that everything in the world can only be sustained by Kedusha, but we have an ability to elevate the physicality into spirituality, as opposed to chasing after Ataivas. Avraham Avinu began the process of elevating the physical world into the spiritual world. How did he do that? By being machnas orchem. How did that happen? So Avraham Avinu stood by the opening of the tent. Why specifically by the opening of the tent? So the Bas Ayin says that's a remez, the bechinas ner Chanukah, to the idea of ner Chanukah. Not necessarily to the ner Chanukah itself, but that the mitzvah of ner Chanukah is done by the opening of the house. Shemitzvasa pesach habayis. And even though Avraham Avinu's house was open to bring machnes orchen by megar gerim, the reason that he was so into these two mitzvahs or these two avodas because hu tikkun atoyu, which means, as the Ayin, ki hatikun hu shal toyu hu lahalois hamidos agashmiyim Mechinas klipos, mechinas atoyu. The ikar tikkun of fixing toyu is to raise physicality from the klipa, which means like this. When we eat, there's two ideas that we could eat. We could either eat because we're hungry, we could either eat because we're starving, and we could eat because we like the food that we're eating, and we could eat until we can't eat anymore. That's to feed our physical bodies. But we could also eat because we want to be able to serve Hashem. Right? We drink the coffee because we have a headache, we want to learn, we want to daven, we want to stay awake, we want to delve deeper into the sugya, we want to eat in order that we have strength, that we could go work. Why do we go work? So we can support our family, so we could do mitzvahs. So if we have the idea of whatever we do in the physical world is ultimately to serve Hashem, so we raise the physicality into spirituality. This is a big concept in the Tanya, in Hasidus, also in Kabbalah, obviously. Even in Pshat, that when we eat, and we eat with the idea that to give us strength to serve Hashem, to do mitzvahs, right? Why do we give work? That we should have meiser, that we could give tzedakah. So we now elevate the physicality into the spirituality, and through that, we start fixing the world. And that's what Avrahom Avinu did. When Avraham Avinu was machnas to Orchim, he brought in not just the Orchim, the people, he brought in all the Gashmias into his tent. And by telling the people, don't thank me for the food, thank Hashem, let's bench, let's give thanks to Hashem, let's do a service for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that raised all the physicality that the people were machnas with them into spirituality, as the Basayin is going to explain. Which means that part of our avodah is that whatever we do, when we go out into the street, when we go out to work, should be l'shem shemayim. Why am I drinking this coffee? Not because I'm tired, because I want to be able to serve Hashem better, because I want to be able to learn the Gemara. Why am I going to work? In order to make a Kiddush Hashem, in order that people should see how Yidden act, in order to be able to have parnasa to buy tefillin, to send my kids to yeshivas and to schools, and to do mitzvahs, and to buy things that I need for Shabbos, so on and so forth. V'tamid yeh yiras Hashem l'neged panav. V'tamid yechavin la'avodosa yizbarach. We know lahavdil, if you have a business, you could either go out with somebody to eat, right, and you can pay for it, or if a slight, obviously legitimate expense, and say it's a business expense because now you're not just going out to eat with a friend, you happen to be going legitimately out with a customer, with a client, then now it's not just an expense, it's actually a business expense. The government pays you, rewards you for generating business. So lahavdil, the same thing. We could either go out to eat, we could either go out to work, or we can go out to eat and to work l'shem shemayim. And if we do l'shem shemayim, we now raise the physical world back into the spiritual world. That has to be done throughout the Doros, especially in the days of the Yavanim. The Yavanim were the peak of physicality, both in body, in food, and in mind. And part of their reasoning to go after Klal Yisrael, because Klal Yisrael was the spitz, was the peak of spirituality, and that conflicted with their way of life. And that's why they attacked the Beis HaMikdash, they made pirtus in the Beis HaMikdash, they tried to do everything they can to turn Klal Yisrael into Greeks, and by us overcoming that, and now raising everything back up to spirituality, we were able to ultimately fix the state of Toyim. When we do everything l'shem shemayim, we raise all the physical mebchinas toyu l'shorsham lebechinas kedusha. We raise the physical world back into kedusha. V'zehu bechinas achnosas archim. This is the concept, the idea of achnosas archim, and this is why Avraham Avinu gave the guests to eat, to drink, to different things, to rest, and he told them this is all that you should understand, that this all comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That helped, as we explained before, raise the physical into the spiritual. That's also the concept of being Megaya Gerim. Now, even though we don't go out actively to be Megaya Gerim, but when a Ger becomes into Klal Yisrael, he brings along with him all the physical things that were attached to him, and now it's raised into the spiritual world. That's also called Achnas Orchim. We're being machnes the Orchim back from physical into spiritual. V'zehu ba'atzma tikkun matoyu. Kasher mal osam l'kedusha, u'b'chol zeh osak Avrahom Avinu, v'yibesach pesuach l'revacha u'rotz alayim l'ha'ir, to lighten up l'chol ha'bechina shel toyu kedei la'loisom. So we learned an amazing thing. We learned that the world was in a state of chaos, toyu, where spiritual and physical were all mixed together, and there wasn't this concept that whatever we do was to benefit the spirituality, was to benefit Kedusha. Rather, people went after their taivas. This all started to change when Avraham Avinu did the bris milah, and he started waiting by the Pesach oil in order to be machnes orchem. And the Ayin is meramis that the word machnes orchem not only means to bring in guests into the house and to serve them, but also to be machnes, the physical that was all in the world, and to raise it back up into Kedusha, to take the physical part of the world, the eating, the drinking, the sleeping, the clothing, the working, and to all use it as a way to serve Hashem. That ultimately was the beginning of the tikkun process until the ultimate peak of physical of the Yevonim, until we overcame them. That's why it says mitzvahs ner Chanukah manicha al Pesach beis hamichutz. The Ayin explains, why do we specifically put the ner Chanukah by the opening of the doorway? Now we know there's different reasons. One of the reasons was that the Yevonim refused to allow Klal Yisrael to lock their doors. They had to either leave their doors open or actually remove the door from its frame. The Ayin explains there's another reason, b'derech avoida, for us to understand what is our avoida. B'shas hasakana. Right, the halach is when there's a sakon in the world, manicha shulchan v'dayu. You don't have to even leave it by the window; you can leave it on your table. Pirish. And the Bas Ayin explains this al pi derech avoda. What is the remez that we have to do as Yidden with this halacha? And the Bas Ayin beautifully explains mitzvah lanicha pesach mebachutz kedei laha'ir lechol b'chinas hachitzonim. The reason that we put it on the outside is that the whole world should see that there's Chanukah. Somebody who has the ability to go into the day-to-day world with the kavanah that I'm using everything to serve Hashem. It was not for no reason that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was very into the Chanukah candles, the menorah to being lit and to spread out throughout the world. Right? He always said that he wanted his Hasidim to be a lamppost. Why? He wanted the world should see that you could serve Hashem and still have a physical connection to this world, as long as it was done all l'shem shemayim. And that is the remez of mitzvahs ner Chanukah. On the outside, to be mayor, to light up the world. That is the best thing we could do. Mitzvahs ner Chanukah liyas b'chutz. To be on the outside, bechinas chutz. The bechina of the tzad hasitra, the sitra akra is chutz. When a person is sakana, where he doesn't trust himself to go into the physical world too much because he's afraid that he's going to endanger himself, then what he should do is eat and drink properly. Eat and drink properly you can do in the privacy of your own home. You don't have to deal with the day-to-day world. You don't have to go into places that are possibly sakana. And that, the Bas Ayin says, is also a very important part of the avodah. When we eat and when we drink, and we have in mind to use that as strength to serve Hashem, that raises the physical part of the food into the upper worlds, and that continues the process of tikkun even to this day. And a person should always work with the idea to not only serve Hashem through the physical, but also through being mekar his taiva. A person sometimes has a fire for a certain taiva. He has to eat this piece of meat. He has to eat this piece of steak. He has to do this avera. He has to do that avera. And even something that he's permitted to do. But if he cools off the Yetzer Hara for that, that tremendously helps. And ulai yirachem, Hashem says the Bas Ayin, that will bring him to the ultimate level of anova v'shiflus. And the Bas Ayin explained, and he continues, we skipped about 6-7 lines. We said it outside. When it says mitzvasa mishetishka hachama, the Bas Ayin says that's meramis, that you should be mishakeya, your fire to do physical. Hainu she'or Hashem yo'er v'yishka b'liboy at shetichle regel melashok. Until you no longer have the taivas of the shuk of the marketplace. And the Bas Ayin finishes off by explaining that one of the things that we have to do is not to do things rote, not to do things like we're sleeping. Rather, we should do things with the always with the concept of the idea that we want to raise the physical world into the spiritual world. That was the avodah that Avrahom Avinu started by being machnas orchim. That was the avodah that Klal Yisrael did, and where they told the Yevanim there's not a contradiction to use the physical world for avodas Hashem. The Yevanim said you can't have both. You can't use the physical world and the spiritual world together. And we said we could, as we brought karbonos, as we lit candles with physical, right? We lit the menorah with the oil, the physical parts of the world, and as we do today, where we constantly do in order to live, right? We have to eat, we have to drink, we have to sleep, we have to work. But if we do it all, we yiras hashumayim to serve Hashem, we do the ultimate tikkun of raising the physical world back to the spiritual world. Freilich Chanukah, and hopefully everybody enjoys the last few days of Chanukah.